Broadcasting live from Youngville, North Carolina and Ontario, Canada. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly show where Vicky Rowe and AJ Aramits bring you the mead news, meadery info, and mead making discussions from all over, talking with mead makers, mead owners, industry mavens, and influencers. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly podcast about mead and the people who love it and where the mead world is going. And now here are your hosts, Got Mead owner Vicky Rowe and mead and wine maker AJ Aramits.
Live from the den of the puppies. Sorry, Hamish says funny things. Live from the den of the puppies of the apocalypse, the bunny pen in Ottawa, Canada, Melbourne down under. It's Got Me Live. Welcome to the show. Tonight's guest is Raphael Lyon, who's the owner of Enlightenment Wine in New York, Brooklyn, New York. And he does wild meads, natural meads. So it's really going to be interesting to see, because he does this commercially. So he's obviously dug really deep into the wild winemaking because he's been doing this for 7 years. So, I think he's probably got some stuff to teach us. And there's a lot of folks out there that like to do things that way. So I think this is going to be a really fun show. Now you all know that we do this because, like you, we're just nuts about mead, and but the software, the hardware, the storage, that all costs money. It's over $200 a month right now. We want to be able to upgrade to better software, more bigger storage because we're starting to get full with all the shows sitting out there. And yeah, I mean, they only give us so much space, but I want to be able to upgrade to a better package, and I'm researching, but again, that costs more money. So the only way we can do that is we depend on you guys, the listeners, to help us get there. So we hope you'll consider becoming a supporting patron member and encourage your friends who like the show to also do so. It's only $30 a year. You get access to, well, you're helping the show, obviously, but you get access to the patron forums on the Got Mead forum, where there's a lot of award-winning recipes and a lot of advanced mead making techniques. You also get into our Got Meat Patrons Facebook group. So 50 cents a week gets you, access to the boards, award-winning recipes, patron Facebook group, and you are helping to support the site and the show to continue spreading the word of mead and bringing you good mead information. So thanks very much to the folks who signed up last week. We got one or two new ones, and that's great. Thank you very much. And those of you that keep renewing, you're awesome, and I love you. You know that, right? If you want to listen to us live, you can check us on the Got Mead website, gotmead.com, obviously. And if you go to just click Got Mead Live, there's the player right there, and it's live, and we are. And otherwise, it's playing whatever the most recent show is. If you prefer to listen in later, you can check us out on Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher. Just search Got Mead Live. Got replays going back to the beginning of the show, and they stay there forever. We are missing a couple. There are some of you who have asked about it. We had a couple of glitches, and I just haven't had time to sit down, pull it up on Audacity, and fix the files. So, oh, and you can also get all of our shows on YouTube as well. You can say thanks to Yannick for that. Yannick Goosen is managing the YouTube for Got Mead. He's doing a fantastic job. So thank you, Yannick. If you want to find us in social media, Facebook, we are facebook.com/gotmead. And our main group is facebook.com/groups/gotmead. On Twitter, we are at gotmeadnow. Feel free to tweet us. I'm usually watching the feed during the show. If you want to send us questions, just put your mouse over gotmead.com, put your mouse over Got Mead Live Radio Show. There's a drop down there where you can send us questions or suggestions on who you'd like us to have on the show. If you've got some particular people, please let us know. We're always interested in who you guys want to hear from. And of course, assuming that Skype is being cooperative, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, you can call us at 803-443-MEAD. That's 803-443-6323. Whew. Now I need to breathe. So what are you drinking, AJ? Wait a minute, you guys aren't going out over the airwaves here. Hang on. What the? Yeah, all right, guys. Guys out there listening, can you hear? Yeah, I can see my, okay. I don't know what the heck is going on here, but you guys aren't going out over the air. Um, yeah, I know, we didn't do the fuckity fuck dance. Oh, I see where it is. Here's the problem. It should be in a second. All right, say something.
Something?
Welcome to Got Mead
There you
Live.
are. Okay, good.
All right, we're back.
I can't hear you anymore, but
Oh, that's
Excellent.
just
Well,
lovely.
to answer Vicky's question while she tries to sort this out, I
I-
am having myself a nice cup of tea down
I
here
can't
in
hear you guys at all,
Geelong, not
which is
live
weird.
from Melbourne, down in Geelong.
I can see you going out on
And,
the system, but
And is that Vicky talking over me? I hope everyone else can't
Yes.
hear that. And,
there we
yeah, so I'm
go.
down in Geelong
Okay,
today,
now I can hear
and,
everybody's stupid system. Okay, all right. Good God. This
Hamish
is
was
why,
going
okay,
on about his tea.
This is why we need
What
new
kind of tea
equipment.
was it, Hamish?
Yeah, what kind of tea was it, Hamish?
It was a simple black Dilmar tea today, with a dash of milk. Gently brewed at only 80 degrees Celsius for a good 3 minutes. It's quite lovely.
Cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying some new teas when I come over there. I'm a big tea fan.
Now AJ was having something today.
Yeah, I've got myself a bottle of Meridian Hives Fandango, and I'm really enjoying this. It's nice and sweet, and there's this really nice little twist of lime to offset the sweetness. It's really nice light citrus. I'm quite enjoying this.
All right, you know what that's really good with? Truffles.
Mm-hmm.
Truffles.
Well, it's not bad with the chocolate chip cookie I just ate.
Bet, yeah. I had a bottle of
Black
that.
truffles or white truffles?
Black truffles, dark chocolate. It was amazing.
Yeah, I bet that would be a religious experience,
It
but
pretty
I
much
don't
was,
think
yeah.
I have any good chocolate within reach right now, so
Well,
it'll have to wait till tomorrow.
I had the last bits of that Seas chocolate that Teresa gave me, and it was pretty orgasmic. It's really, really good.
I think I have a Toblerone bar somewhere, but I don't think that's the right. I think this needs a dark chocolate, not a milk chocolate.
Yeah, dark. Yeah, it needs a dark chocolate. Everybody's posting all their pictures of what they're drinking right now. I'm
Nice.
drinking your mead, AJ, the Zinfandel Blush Ice Style Wine. It was
Formerly
staring
referred
at
to
me
as Chateau
today.
Plywood.
Yeah, well, it's not Chateau Plywood anymore. 15% though, so I'm gonna be really careful about this. But it's oxidized a little, so it's a really dark sort of brownish red, but it's got lots of fruity nose, chocolate and kind of leather notes in the nose. It's really silky, and the oxidation kind of gives it some depth, I think. You know, it doesn't, it's not hurting it at all. And tons of fruit in it. I mean, tons of fruit. And then there's notes of like leather and coffee and chocolate in there. It's actually quite good. I kind of want some ice cream now. You know?
Yeah, I think I might do that. I think I have another batch of that kit. I think I'm gonna repeat that.
Yeah, I think
presuming
you should.
the stuff's still on. But
Yeah,
it's
this
you know,
works.
yeah, like just take a wine kit and dilute it to 3 gallons instead of 5. Presto, cheap ass ice style wine.
Instant ice style wine, right?
Yeah, or instead just sweeten it up with honey and end up with a nice style piment.
Yeah, there you go.
Might do that. Get more out of it that way.
Totally. Okay, we've got a public service announcement for Enlightenment. Enlightenment Wines has been focusing on small batch natural meads made with wild yeast, foraged herbs, and locally sourced fruit since 2009. These honey-based wines are dry, not sweet, around 12% alcohol, barrel fermented, and released seasonally. We have 2 production locations, one in a family farmstead in the Hudson Valley and the other in Brooklyn. Find us on Instagram or buy our bottles online at enlightenmentwines.com. So I'm going to go ahead and get Raphael in here, and we're going to pick his brains about...
Yeah, sounds rather interesting. I've always wondered how people who do natural wines manage to get their repetition and the quality to do it commercially. So I'm quite looking forward to having a chat to him, actually.
Yeah,
that in
me
a
too.
time frame.
Yeah. Hi, Raphael. How you doing?
Hi, this is Raphael Lyon and Enlightenment Wines. Please leave a message.
Oh no, we got
Record your
Raphael's.
message after the
We
tone.
got Raphael's
Simply hang
voicemail.
up
Oh
when
my
done.
God.
Or for delivery options,
Hang it up,
press
hang
the
it up.
pound
I'm
sign.
trying to. No, I don't
Wow.
want to leave the call. I just
Oh,
want to leave
God.
Raphael's part of the call.
We really didn't do enough of the
Hang up
fuckity
on
fuck
him.
dance today,
Yeah,
did
apparently not.
we?
So yeah, and I don't know if I've got any way to get a hold of him other than his phone number. So oh well, darn it. That's gonna be mad at him if he like totally blew me off.
Well, I guess you can try it again and be
Yeah,
prepared to mute.
yeah, we will. It's not the first time we've had that happen. So
No.
No, it's not. It's
yeah.
not.
So let's
Perhaps AJ and I can shoot the breeze while you take yourself off air to call him again.
So what horrible things have you got planned for Vicky when she comes to visit?
Well, we haven't got anything really horrible. We've got we're organising a few. We got a meet up in Melbourne. We've
Cool.
catching up with the guys in New South Wales. We're going to a
Hello.
Raphael.
Oh,
Hi.
hello.
Hey.
We got your voicemail the first time. It was like, where is he? Welcome to Got Me Live.
Oh, geez. I'm here. Let me put on my. You can hear me.
Okay. Yeah, you are a little faint.
Is
Better?
that better?
Yes, it is.
That's fantastic.
Well, welcome to
So,
Got Me Live. You're on with me and Hamish Lucas, who's in Australia, and AJ Ermack, who is in Canada.
Hi.
Oh, hey guys.
So
We're good. How about you?
Yeah.
I'm doing good. Sorry if I'm late. But
No,
happy to
you're
join the party.
fine. We called and got your voicemail, so I guess I don't know what happened, but anyway, we got you now, so we have you trapped until we let you go.
Great. How much
Yeah.
time do we have?
We've got a couple of hours.
All
There's
the
a
time
lot
in the
of
world.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are curious about wild mead making. I mean, there's a lot more interest in that. You know this, of course, because you see it every day. But we were just chatting as we were calling you about how curious we are about what you're doing and how you're doing things and how you get your meads to come out well and 89 million other questions. So
Okay.
I think before we get into as far as we start digging into the meads, tell the listeners a little bit about you and Enlightenment and what you guys are doing right now so they can kind of get a sense of you.
Okay, great. So my name is Raphael Lyon. I'm the founder of Enlightenment Wines. We are one of the older meaderies in the country. I think we got our license in 2009. So that puts us up there, and I think probably the top 10 or 20, especially if you consider people are just making mead. So I've been doing this for a long time and probably started in 2000 unprofessionally. And we've changed a lot over the years. I started out in my family's farm in upstate New York, and we've expanded into Brooklyn, which is where I live now. So we've got a meadery there, and we've got an adjoining tasting room. The tasting room is called Honey's. It's also a cocktail bar. So that's kind of our main. We've been really focusing on serving the New York City, kind of Brooklyn community. So we do pretty small batches. I mean, we're scaling up all the time, but right now, we've been pretty much serving locally, and then of course we sell a lot online. But you're not going to see us at the Kroger's or anything like that soon.
Okay.
Was that good?
No, that was great. No, you're fine, Rafe.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. Let me do the basics right. Okay. So we're a farm winery, and in New York, part of being a farm winery, you get certain privileges, which allows you to sell directly to customers, which is nice for us. So when I started, we had the nation's first alcohol-based CFA. So if you know community-supported agriculture, that's a movement by farmers to have direct relationships between the farm and consumers. So they would drop off like a bag of mixed produce sort of once a week of whatever they were growing. And it was to kind of recreate a model of agriculture that was before everything was kind of big and wholesaled. So what was nice about that model, which we took on at the meadery, and it was really just me at that time, is that basically I had a subscription of people, and I would just make mead for them. And what that would allow me to do was, every few months they would get a new case, and I could experiment a lot, but mostly I got a lot of feedback really fast from people because I'd actually know them. It's only been recently that most of the mead has been sold to people that no one in the business actually sees, right? So I started with the CSA, which is basically a subscription model. In Sonoma, they would call that a cult winery, meaning that most of it is you're on an email list and the wine comes out and then people buy it and it comes out. And you're not really moving through a wholesale market. It's almost all direct.
Okay.
And we use, since the very beginning, all 100% New York State products. So things grown in New York, and New York's a really great place for that. We have great apples. We've got black currants and cherries, elderberries, and wonderful honey, of course, and then a wide range of herbs. And that was always the focus for me, was not to figure out what I could make that the most people wanted to buy. I think what was the real goal from the very beginning was to think about New York State and to think about what terroir would mean for wine, for honey wine, to think about the mead as an expression of a place. And so for me, it was okay, so we've got all this stuff in New York. How do we express what we do really well here? I mean, for example, I've made meads with pineapples. Pineapple's a wonderful thing to make mead with, but we're just never going to grow it here. So it's just not part of my routine.
Yeah.
And if I move to Florida or California, we open a meadery there, I'm going after those lemons soon. But, for us, totally. The constraints of what we work with here really allows us to refine what we're doing. So, I like to think that, we have a bottle of, for example, there's a bottle we're serving right now called Night Eyes, and it's an apple and cherry mead, but it's a sparkling mead, and it has rose hips and sumac, which is a kind of sour flower that grows everywhere up here. And that's just a great expression of New York State in the summer. I mean, it's just all the stuff that you see on the hillsides. And so that's kind of the main motive. And then about 4 years ago, it might be longer than that, I teamed up with Anthony Rock, who has a business background, and also Arley Marks, who was a good friend of mine and had been making cocktails for a bunch of really great restaurants in New York, and has sort of established himself as a cocktail guy. And also, an old friend and someone I really like, we get along with well. And we decided to take Enlightenment Wines to the sort of a bigger level and raise money to open the tasting room and start doing scaling our wholesale and stuff. And that's been great because we get to be, working with Arley has really been a really great education for me in terms of what cocktail makers are looking for, and also what people use for cocktails, especially on the kind of bleeding edge of cocktails. So, for example, not base cocktails, but just for reference, one of our best cocktails we serve is an ocean water martini with these salted autumn olives. So that means that we're not using any vermouth. It's a vodka, and then we actually go out to the bar Montauk and get ocean water, which gives it the sort of brininess that an olive would. And then I'll forage autumn olives, which are an invasive, but they have these great little berries, and you salt them, and they're kind of like capers. And then they become the garnish. That's a really popular drink. So if you're going to drink that, then, you already have a bunch of really interesting, weird, wonderful things on the menu. Rolling the mead into it sort of contextualizes that. So all the cocktails on our menu are original, really. I mean, they're, and some have mead in them and some don't.
Interesting. When you're making your meads, do you ever make a mead with an eye to a particular profile that's gonna be in a cocktail?
That's a good question. So this has been a transition for me, particularly because in the old days, I would I call it like you sort of build the mead, right? So it's like cut parts and, it happens over time, but you sort of think about I think a lot about the experience of drinking it. Is this the kind of thing you're going to pour in a glass and drink like 4 or 5 ounces of it? Are you going to have it with food? Are you going to pour it like in a little glass and just sip it? Because there's a whole world of alcohol. Like when we think of most of what people drink is sort of beer and wine, it's sort of table beer and wine. So it's either designed to be really refreshing and you can drink a few of them, or maybe it's a little bit heavier and you have it with food. And that's fine. And we make things like that. But there's also a whole world of alcohols called vermouths and amaris or amaros. So vermouth, maybe people know about for making martinis, but there's a whole world of these sort of herbal wines that are designed to be drunk in like 2 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Italy, it's like I always have this image of these kind of old guys and they sit on the porch or whatever. They don't drink very much, but they kind of sip it. Maybe you have an ice cube with it. And then so you've got Campari and things like that. And then you get into these Amaros, which are, they're all sort of fortified. So the alcohol level is a little bit higher, but typically they've got a bunch of herbs in them or, a little juice of some kind. And typically they're bitter and they're pretty intense. I mean, when the bottom line of it, when you're making cocktails, if you have to put a lot of something in, it's more expensive and you can water down the drink. And it's in general, like working with, so one of the bars that I work with is called Please Don't Tell, or PDT, in the city. And I mean, this is a real, great cocktail bar. The guy's been around forever. He's written a lot of books. He's quite famous. It was one of the best cocktail bars. Jim Meeham is a guy.
Okay.
He was very sweet to me when I started out, and I've been working with him for years. And I would bring him, for example, we make a black currant mead, and it's great. It's very dry. And I was like, oh, he's going to love this because what's cool. And he's like, I can't use this. I love it. You should drink it on its own. But if I want to get the black currant flavor into my cocktail, well, there's this liqueur that I can use that it's more intense, and I only need to use half an ounce of it. Okay. And so he taught me about sort of the economics of the cocktail making. So to make a long story short, something that I like to drink a lot on its own is called Chinar, which is, you've probably seen it. It's got like an artichoke on it. It's sort of a bitter. You can drink it by itself, but people also make cocktails with it. It sort of does double duty.
Uh-huh.
And I was making, and most of the meads that I was making that for cocktails, they kind of were like that. They were fine to drink, but you could also use them in a cocktail. What I've been learning is that actually in general, it's better to make a decision and push it into one of those categories or not. So the dagger, so we make about 3 or 4 cocktail meads. And what that means is that they're designed for mixing with. Some people, including myself, will love to drink them on their own. We don't expect that, just in the same reason that people don't drink very commonly vermouth on its own. It's not like very popular, though lots of people do and they love it. And I definitely recommend you can go to the store, do not buy the one that you see behind. Ask for a nice vermouth.
Yeah.
Out there. But you pour it in a little glass and you sip it, and it's really flavorful. But in general, like, we make a dandelion wine. It's very bitter. It's really intense. It's very unique. We make a dagger, which is a cherry base, but it's got several botanicals like fir, hemlock, and yarrow, and chamomile. So again, bitter.
Interesting.
The Floralia is another one. It's got juniper, lavender, and marjoram. But
that one.
in the old days, I would make. Yeah, it's really nice. But in the old days, I would make it with a lighter infusion, and this year we're tending to make it. They tend to make it a little bit more bitter.
Okay.
You need that bitterness to cut any of the sugar that people put in cocktails and to balance the acidity and stuff. So those are kind of our cocktail meads, and they're in smaller bottles, and they tend to be drunk in smaller amounts. So at the bar, we serve them in 2-ounce pours. So they're like a half-size pour, and it's $7 or something, and and then we also will make cocktails with them. So that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So did I answer the question?
Yeah, no, well, yeah, it does. And it just creates more questions too, which is great. That's the whole idea. But it's really cool because you're bucking the trend. You're making unique meads with herbal combinations that are quite unusual for what is considered to be, mainstream, I guess. And so you're looking, like you say, bleeding edge, but it's really interesting because I was, after reading some of the ingredients when I saw you at the New York Firm Fest in the spring, I was like in my mind going, ew, these are going to be weird and strange, but they weren't. I mean, they were different and they were very unique, but they were good. And so, like in my mind's eye, I had this sort of mental image of what I thought it would taste like, but it tasted, it worked. It worked together, and it happened in a way that I really wasn't expecting. Was very pleased to find I was wrong.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll tell you. You got to. I mean, there's some basic like logical decisions that I think I had to make, especially when you're raising money and you're coming up with a business plan. You have to sort of explain to people why this makes sense. And I think that the first thing is that like I think there's sort of a contradiction. I mean, look, if you're the kind of person in the world and who's the imaginary customer, right, who likes really sort of kind of tepid things and doesn't want to try new stuff and is really happy with Budweiser or Zima or something like that.
That isn't most of us, thank God, but
then you're in the wrong shop.
Yeah, you're in the wrong place.
You're
for
like,
that.
why are you trying? Like, why would the person drink a mead? Like the person who drinks mead, at least in my experience, are largely the people who have already liked. And I'm not talking about like craft beer aficionados who are sort of stretching out. Mostly it's people who've been drinking cider or farmhouse cider, meaning they want to drink, they just want to try something new. They want to try something interesting, refreshing. Those people already are kind of want to expand their palate and learn about new stuff. And I think they're kind of turned on by that challenge. At least for our customers, it's like, if someone's coming in and they want a Jameson and Coke or like a Bud, it's like, we don't serve that stuff. We don't have it. We have other things. We can give you another whiskey that's better and it's the same price, and that's part of coming to our places, is that we're educating people. Like, actually, there's this whole line of other bourbons that you should try out, and they don't cost anymore, and they actually are much better, and they don't have sugar added to them, for example. So that's kind of our mentality about it, is that like these things we're gonna. We're just like our customer base. Like, they're really excited to they see the word hemlock on there and they think it's like the poison hemlock, and it's kind of a turn on. They're like, oh, this is dangerous.
We gotta try this.
In the words of Socrates, I drank what?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly.
It's like that Japanese figure or whatever, the fish.
No, I think it's really cool because I try weird things. And my husband, okay, he's Mr. I like he's got his favorite bourbons, and those are what he drinks. And I have to say, I'm a bit of a stick in the mud with my single malt Scotch, because I have one that I really like, and I stick with that. But I'm also a rum fan, and I fell over a rum produced on the Outer Banks right here in North Carolina at the liquor store the other day, and I snagged that puppy and brought it home, and oh my God, I can't even mix this with anything because it's just so good all by itself.
And that's the thing, is like if you make something special that you can't get anywhere else, partially because it's really from New York, and partially it's just because it's how we do things. Our customers are really, really loyal. They're not going to find it anywhere else. I mean, I wish there were more people experimenting. I feel like the field is really open for doing regional meads, and I wish more people were doing it. And I think, also the other thing too is that, my perspective, I guess it's interesting because my perspective is also like, when you talk about what we do in the context of like the general mead world, right? And it feels like what we're doing is sort of experimental. And I understand why that makes sense, because if you look at what most of the new commercial meaderies are doing, or what a lot of homebrewers are doing, and that would make sense. But if you look at the history of mead, if you actually look at what mead makers have done for the last 10,000 years, the weirdest thing in that conversation is somebody making a 6% alcohol sterile thing and putting it in a can. That has nothing to do with the way mead has been made. Like, mead's always been made with herbs, and it's always been made with herbs because the tannins in the herbs are what help clear the mead until we invent like massive, fine filtration systems. It's very hard to clear your mead, especially if you're using wild yeast. So using local herbs, using local fruits all the archaeological evidence points towards mixed fermentations with local ingredients. So like for me, I feel like even though I don't think there was much mead made in the Americas, particularly not in New York, I feel like what we're doing is actually extremely traditional. Even though it can feel experimental from our like particular time vantage point, I feel like I'm always reading these like books about Native American herbology so that I can understand like what they used for food and stuff in our area. And
Cool.
I love Patrick McGovern's books, and I read all those things, and it's like that's where I'm coming from. So I feel like I'm doing something kind of like boring in a way.
Well, yeah. No, you're actually carrying on in a lot of ways, you're carrying on what used to be a fine American tradition. If you go back and look, and I'm a bit of a mead historian myself, there's Martha Washington had a recipe book, and in that book, so this is 1700s, in that book, she had a number of mead recipes, and all of them were, had herbs of various kinds in them, and most of them, there wasn't any like honey water yeast. They were all like rosemary and burdock and, and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to find that. Sadly, that kind of died away by the mid 1800s. It was almost completely gone, but in the early days of America, in the colonial days, and during the Revolution, it was quite popular.
Yeah, and I think it's, part of the reason that people are making mead the way they are and not the way that Martha Washington is because they've come to it through the homebrew world, which has its own like infrastructure for buying stuff at stores, mostly which aren't that many, which doesn't really include a lot of herbs usually. They often will have juniper there and orange peel for beer, but if you're making mead and you're buying your stuff at a beer store, like you're missing this whole other world of things.
No, I'm an herb
for example, like
nut.
So like my first exposure to making alcohol was really my stepmother, who was making dandelion wine, and she's using
my dad did that.
Susan Weed's recipe, which is like kind of on the internet. It has all this weird ideas in it, like floating a piece of bread with yeast on it, like upside down.
I think my dad had that same recipe.
and you're like, well, and I'm always fascinated with this stuff. Yeah, I'm always fascinated with that because it's like, these people aren't stupid. It comes from somewhere. There's a reason for all this stuff, and it often takes a long time to figure it out. But the mead was, but she neglects in that recipe to rack anything, so it ends up being like really, really strong and really yeasty. And over the years I've refined it, but it's funny because I've been doing this long enough to like. So that there wasn't really an internet when I was starting. This kind of information wasn't on the internet, so you'd have to kind of find it in books and things. And that recipe is interesting because I've seen it like kind of bounce around the internet now and sort of get morphed and change. And there's all these like strange ideas associated with it. I was talking to someone. I'm kind of a fan of I don't really do a lot of social media, but we do. Every now and then I go into Reddit Mead. In the Reddit mead world and like post something because it's sort of an interesting community there. And like there's this obsession with dandelion wine that has to do with taking the sepals off, taking the green part of the flower off and just putting in the petals, which is insane. Like it's so much work, right? And I'm not against doing a lot of work, but that is a lot of work. And the irony is that the only reason that anyone ever made dandelion wine in the first place was because it was a spring tonic. Because dandelions have all this vitamin C and iron and liver and all of that's actually it's in the sap.
Yeah,
so it's not so you want some of that
scurvy,
stuff.
It's in the bitter bits
exactly.
anyway.
Yeah, right. So it's supposed to be bitter. It's a digestif. Now I'm not saying you shouldn't take those green things off. I'm sure the wine tastes delicious, but if you imagine a farmer, they got they got stuff to do.
Yeah. You don't have time to sit there and pick all the green off. Yeah.
Well, that's the reason I've never made dandelion wine, because if you don't pick the green off, it gets bitter, and I've got a limited bitter tolerance. So.
Yeah.
Oh,
See,
yeah.
no, I like.
But that sounds like really work intensive.
I don't mind doing it because
And a limited work tolerance, yeah.
Yeah. My dad, when I was a kid, my dad did the dandelion wine thing, and we had to pick every dandelion in like a 2-acre yard. It was ridiculous. We had a 5-gallon pail of dandelions, and
oh man, I don't know if you saw. I should post some pictures of this. We just made a 200 we made a 250-gallon batch of dandelion wine. So that'll be, it's like a pallet worth of 375s.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to pick, 200, 300 pounds of flowers for that.
God.
There's just no cheating on that.
No,
you know what
really,
I mean? You just have to get on your hands and knees and pick them. And then if anyone's doing this at home, one of the things that I've learned over the years, I've been making this for years, you have got to keep them cold. Like, you have to pick them when they're open, and they have to get into a refrigerator before they start. The seed heads, the flowers will turn into seeds in like 6 hours if you just leave them out. After you pick them. So you have to rush. So you have to kind of keep them in a cooler and then freeze them right away. If you want to, and that's the only way to accumulate enough. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I'd like to grow them out because I'm not convinced that they necessarily taste better if you put all the extra work into it. But I think next
one of our listeners is asking, how many dandelion blossoms are there in a pound?
Lots.
Okay. I will tell you that if you take a 2-gallon bag, which is like a big freezer bag, that weighs 2 or 3 pounds. So it's about a pound a gallon. If you can imagine, it's hard because they get the size. They kind of change size, but the way I think about it is if you were to lift up a bottle of mead and you were to fill it up with dandelion flowers, for each bottle you basically have about a third of the bottle full. That's the kind of density that is required. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you can water it down too and something that doesn't taste like much, but if you want to really have the real deal, you got to put a lot of flowers in it.
Holy cats. So is that fermented when you do your dandelion wine? Is that done with a wild yeast?
No, we don't use a wild yeast for that, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's a weird one for us at Dandelion Wine because it's one of the only ones we want to do at a really high strength alcohol. We do that at 16 or 17%.
Whoa.
And if you want to because I used to fortify it in the old days, but there's, I don't want to bore everyone about this, but if you're making legal honey wine, you're not, if you make a grape wine and you want to fortify it, you want to make a fortified wine. That's what vermouths are. They're fortified aromatized wines, meaning they put herbs in it, which means that's how it gets aromatized, and they're fortified. So they lift the alcohol up from 12% to maybe 16 or 18 or whatever.
Right.
Typically, there's a rule that's called like to like, which means if you have a grape wine, you're supposed to put a grape distillate in it. However, if you have a honey wine, you are not allowed to put a honey distillate in it. You can't make distilled honey vodka and pour it in your honey wine to fortify. You're not allowed to do it. It's a weird, broken part of the regulations. So I can't fortify our honey wines. But you are allowed to ferment up. So we have to do a high gravity fermentation, ferment up to 16 or 17%, and that's very hard to do with wild yeast. So for that one, we don't use wild yeast. No.
So while we're on this,
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna plug our lacto sparkling mead coming out in about a month. Yeah.
Oh, really? I heard you were working on something about that. You kind of hinted around about that. Yeah. What's with that? All right, so spill,
it's really exciting. So we're making a sour mead and it's sparkling. And again, this is another one of these things. So we don't carbonate anything. We don't have the only CO2 we use is sometimes we pour it in the barrels to top them off so there's not so much oxygen in them. Mm-hmm. But we don't carbonate anything. So all of our sparkling meads are made the way champagne is made, with the bottle conditioning. So we're making and in the wine world, it's not called bottle conditioning. It's called method ancestral. Or if you were at a wine shop, they would call it a pet nat, which means petit naturel, which refers to the bubbles. And it also refers to the fact that there's sediment on the bottom of the bottle. In the champagne method, they pull the sediment out, but we don't do that. So we have sparkling meads, and they have a little sediment on the bottom, and they'll be cloudy eventually when you pour them. And we do 3 or 4 over the course of the year, various ones. But the new one that's going to come out in a month, and if you go to enlightenmentwines.com, you should be able to sign up for a mailing list, or just email the contact there, and you'll get on the mailing list. We'll tell you when it comes out. But it is going to be, it's a sour, wild fermented sparkling mead. So in practical purposes, what that means is we sour it with a lactobacillus. And these aren't one of these, this is our own strain. We don't, we're not using any of the like kind of single strains that brewers use. So it's a more complex strain, and it produces a lot of like buttery and sort of almost milky notes, which is nice. Like it's like the, it's almost like there's a kind of ice cream quality to it.
Cool.
And then I was actually, we got it spontaneously fermented. So we didn't add yeast to it. So then it just started fermenting, and we're like, okay. And then there's this war that goes on between the lactobacillus trying to turn the sugar into lactic acid, and the yeast, which are trying to turn it into alcohol, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that's so hard about doing that process is the lactobacillus, they're bacteria, right? And so they're like literally a different animal than yeast. Like they're smaller, much smaller, and they reproduce really fast. So they kind of get a head start, but the yeasts are like ocean liners. You know, they're incredibly complex organisms. And so eventually they win. And you want to give the lactic bacteria a head start before the yeast take over. But you need to have enough honey left in there to produce enough alcohol. Like, it's really hard. It's really hard what we did. So I opened up a bottle a week ago. It's sort of half sparkling. And I'm just got my fingers crossed that it'll do the rest of it in the next month or so. But we'll see, you know.
Yeah, it's with the wild yeast, it's interesting because you got that element of not sure that, you know, because it's a wild yeast. So it kind of begs the question of, now I know some of your meads are wild fermented. So how do you manage quality control there? Because I mean, as a commercial meadery, obviously you want every mead you make to be viable because that's money down the tubes otherwise.
So what would your concerns be with the wild yeast? Like, what would be the things that you would be worried about a wild yeast doing that a commercial yeast wouldn't do?
Just consistency between batches would be the first thing I'd be concerned about.
Yeah.
So consistency means what? Like that the alcohol level is the same every time, or
well, if you're making
level, the sweetness level.
Yeah. So let's say you're making an off dry. Rosemary lemon mead. Okay,
sure.
Rosemary lemon balm mead.
Sure.
Okay, which is two plants in
sounds
front of my
great.
house. It is. It's actually very tasty together.
I should make one of those.
You should make one of those because lemon balm's awesome stuff and it grows like weed. You know. But anyway, so let's say you're making an off dry rosemary lemon balm mead. You're gonna wild ferment that thing, and the first wild yeast you get is an awesome yeast and it burns clean, and you get a nice off dry mead that's a clean, refreshing, you know, nice drinker that everybody thinks is fantabulous, and you're like, woohoo, I got a winner. So you do it again. What if you get a different wild yeast? You're going to have a different mead. Is that something that works within what you're doing? I mean, you could get a wild yeast that doesn't make a happy mead. It makes a mead that has weird off flavors that ruins that synergy between the rosemary and the lemon balm. That's the thing that I would think about because I like the idea of wild yeast. I think it's cool, but that consistency factor from a commercial standpoint seems like that would be a problem, or could be a problem.
Well,
yeah. The other thing is you could get a completely sweet, low alcohol mead that was completely out of balance.
It's all these things are possible, and I understand what you're saying. However, I think there's a few mistakes in the way that you're thinking about it, which lead to these thoughts, right? Okay. So the first thing is that like it's not a yeast, right? You know, in a lot of ways, you know, you think about it more like you have a garden, and it's like if you didn't plant anything there, like what's going to grow there? right? But what's going to grow there is going to depend on. It's not like a seed lands. It's like they all land, all the seeds land, and they all fight it out. And what grows there is probably grass or the weed that you have that grows in that area, or eventually a tree. Like in a lot of ways, what ends up growing in that garden is based on the conditions of the garden: how much sun it gets, how much light it gets, how much watering it gets, how much nutrients are in the soil acidity, things like that. So in a lot of ways, you control the population of the yeast by controlling the conditions of the mash or the must, right? So all of the yeasts are in there, right? So every yeast that every bee took from every flower is now sitting in the honey, and it's waiting to express itself. And that will include a whole family of yeasts that will die out at 5 or 6% alcohol, which produce really interesting rose-like flavors. They're really important for farmhouse ciders. Mm-hmm. You simply can't have those flavors if you sulfite your mead. You never have them. And then the various populations of yeast will sort of fight it out, but ultimately they're evolving in there, and they're evolving for the conditions of the mead. It's vastly more important what temperature the must is at than the particular strain of yeast that's in there. Like, for example, my working theory is that the yeast that want to be in there are the yeasts that are already on there because they like honey, and they're happy to live in it, and they survive. And it's a kind of it's a collaboration between me and the yeast and the honey, and like that whole it's an ecosystem really that I'm just sort of a caretaker of. And all I have to say is that you should try it. But that being said, there's a few things. Like, there's yeast, commercial yeast. When I do classes about this stuff, and I want people to kind of understand, they've never fermented before and things like that. Commercial yeast are kind of like dogs, or they're thoroughbreds. They're like bread.
Yeah, they're bred.
They're bred to do things. Like a dog is bred to be short and squat, and it can't barely see, but it can smell and sniff out rats. And then you have this other dog that runs really fast, but its legs break all the time. And then you have another dog that's just really nice to be around the house, but it's stupid as crap, Like
that would have been my yellow one. Sweet as the day is long, but dumb as a rock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, like wild yeasts, they're not like broken versions of the thoroughbred. They're more like street dogs. Like, they're scrappy, they're indestructible, they can eat anything. They're not going to make a 16% alcohol, but they're going to be able to deal with a really wide temperature range without producing off flavors. They're going to be able to do often really amazing things without nutritional supplements. So, like, I used to be, kind of, I was a farmer for a while. So, there's a parallel to this and doing heirloom seeds, right? So like non-GMO, non-hybrid seeds. So if you take a string bean, that, an heirloom string bean, right? And then you take like a commercial variety of string beans and you plant them against each other, which, I did. You see, this interesting thing about the commercial variety is it will produce, if you give it like a bazillion gallons of water and lots of nutrients, it will produce an insane amount of green beans, and they'll all be ready at the same time, which really isn't useful for like a house farmer.
Yeah.
But if you have a drought or if you don't have fertilizers, those things just wither. They're not tough. Like they're like that thoroughbred horse. You need to feed it and give it all this stuff, and it'll run really fast. Meanwhile, the heirloom variety produced string beans all year round.
Yep.
Didn't care if it was too hot, barely needed to water it. It was just more resilient. And I think that the wild yeast have those qualities. Now, there are no giant corporations who are going to write papers about how great wild yeasts are, because their job is to sell you yeast, and they're going to talk about what the commercial yeasts are good for. And it's not like they're not telling you the truth, but I think there's the main benefit of using wild yeast. And again, I think if you were in a wine world, you would call this spontaneous fermentation, because you can buy a wild yeast, which is kind of an oxymoron. But what we're doing is
it's a semi-tame. It's a semi-tame wild yeast. It's kind of not quite domesticated.
Well, it's like getting the mongrel from the rescue.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, except like the mongrel has kind of bad connotations with it. I just think it's like we had a purebred white cat when I was growing up, and all the thing did was be sick.
Yeah.
Like because when you breed something for one specific trait, if you're breeding a yeast for fruit esters or something, or you're breeding a yeast so that it can resist really cold temperatures. But by definition, you're always going to be making compromises. There's going to be other things that you're going to lose in that process. So I tend to think of commercial yeasts as being like bullets. They're very precise, and you can point them at things if you need something done.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I've used them in the past, like I said, for the dandelion wine to bring the alcohol level up. I use them for secondary fermentation in the bottle. So certain really high critical areas where I just don't that is a stressful environment, really, really stressful environment. I'll use a yeast that's really bred for, producing some gas at high alcohol levels in a very stressful environment. It produces no flavor at all. I would never want to make a mead with EC 118 or, this champagne yeast. They don't really do anything, but they're really good at that. So, we use them there. I'll use them sometimes as controls to see for these very reasons, what are the consequences of using a wild yeast? So we'll make a barrel with a commercial yeast for control. Honestly, this is what the big difference is. In general, the flavor is better. The flavor is more complex because it goes through these stages. There's many yeast working, and they all produce different flavors. The downside is that they tend to be cloudy. Most of the thing that you're breeding those yeast for are flocculation, which is their ability to sink after they die. That's kind of a weird thing. In a yeast life, there's very little reason to evolve this quality. So this is something we've kind of introduced, I think. But I'm not sure about that. I'm just sort of guessing. So the wild yeast tend to take longer to clear. And so we have to, but we age our meads about a year anyway before they're going out to market. So that's fine for us. We just let them sit. And also we're putting all these herbs and junk in there, so that our meads aren't like crystal clarity. It's a nice aesthetic quality, but it really has nothing to do with winemaking, I think. So it's not really super important to us. That's the main consequence. If you really like your mead clear, you might have to use some kind of filter or something if you want to knock it out fast.
Yeah, you could always filter that, but that to a certain extent, and I've heard people on both sides of the conversation that some of that not clearness, the floaties, whatever you want to call them, adds a certain it's part of the mead. So from the perspective of if you're going for an entirely natural product, it seems to me that is part of the whole package. The taste and the feel and the texture of the mead, it all comes together with that. So
it can. If done well. The problem with yeast in your bottle is that yeast kind of taste the same.
Yeah.
They all taste kind of the same.
Yeah.
They taste like yeast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at best, and at worst, they taste like bitter yeast.
Yeah.
So the main reason to not have yeast in your bottle is really that it homogenizes one mead to the next. So you don't want all your meads to taste the same, otherwise you would just make one. So that's really the main reason to get the yeast out of there. So I'm not a fan of yeast, but it's not just yeast. It's there's manoproteins. There's all these kind of different proteins and things that are in the meads that affect the flavor. And then also there's there's a whole you would never if you had a wheat beer, from Blue Moon, and then whenever that stuff came out in the 90s, that's how it's supposed to be. They just said no, it's cloudy. That's what this beer's like. And then people are like, all right, tasted great, so they drank it. I kind of feel like that's going on. And then again, look, I'm in Brooklyn, so Brooklyn is its own universe, and people, they love stuff like that. They're really trying to experience some kind of authenticity in their food or something exciting. And again, I'm trying to make what I feel like is really authentic, kind of historically accurate mead. So, it was probably cloudy. Now, that being said, our mead is not cloudy. it's not. It's because we age it.
Yeah.
The
So it
only thing
settles.
that, it settles. The only thing that's cloudy is like the sparkling mead, like at the end of the bottle, it'll be cloudy. And then occasionally, we'll have like an apple mead or something like that, and the proteins will drop out. Typically if the bottle gets a little warm, or, they call these like instabilities, but they're, if you have a mead that's aged for a long time, there might be like a haze on the bottom of the bottle of something, but no serious wine drinker that I know, like people who go to wine bars to drink natural wine or even just good wine, like they don't really blink at that stuff. It's not really a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, the only place I've seen where the brilliance really counts against you in a really significant way is if it's being judged in a competition where that's part of the score, but
right.
I mean, I don't look at wines and go, oh, well, that's less than brilliant, so therefore I'm not going to buy it. If it's something I've heard good things about, I'm going to drink it.
Yeah, it's funny because I never had any of my meads like judged before. I went to the competition, the Major Cup, just to kind of get my head around like what that whole scene's like. And it was interesting to me because like there's a lot of questions about like how things look. But for example, like another quality which winemakers would care about a lot, which is sort of like the mouthfeel.
Yep.
That's sort of wrapped up in those issues. And they have their own, like a filtered wine tends to feel like thinner or something. There's a kind of texture to the liquid that changes. And I think, to be honest, in a lot of ways doing natural mead and trying to think about what that might look like, because, we're sort of like one of the few places that really are trying to do it, because there's a whole established world of what natural winemaking is. And I think I sent you that article about it.
You did, yeah, and I sat there and read the whole thing. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Yeah, so yeah. I mean, you should post a link to that. I would love it if people. Yeah, it's a great primer on like what the grape wine world has been talking about for the last 10 years. Like the main issue in the grape wine world is like this big movement to move away from the Robert Parker like scoring system of like really controlled wines. And it radically, for Americans, it's like hard for us to like understand this exactly. But in Europe, what happened was that these places, these cultures that have been making wine in a particular way for hundreds of years, suddenly like had to conform to this sort of very controlled winemaking kind of version. And now it's sort of there's sort of a pushback to like go back to natural winemaking, which is really, in a lot of ways, like for a maker, if you're making it at home, I think it's a really interesting thing to learn about, because when you make natural wine, what you're saying is like, I want to make this the way people always made it, and to see like what that was like, and also like what are we missing? There was a time when, if you go back into the, I don't know exactly, but probably in the 40s or 50s, and like when white bread starts coming out, everyone's like, oh my God. We've been trying to make our bread like lighter and brighter and softer, and this bread is so white and it's so soft and it's so amazing.
I remember when Wonder Bread was the stuff. I mean, it was like everybody. My grandmother made all of her bread. She did not buy bread. She made her bread from scratch. And buying store-bought bread was like a ooh kind of thing in my family, because we did not do store-bought bread. We made our bread. And yeah, I remember thinking, wow, this is so amazing. And now I look at it and go, ew, I'd rather make bread, So.
Right. And it's like, I'm not going to say it's bad. I mean, everybody likes a nice cake once in a while and stuff, but
sure, yeah.
It's like, it's just sort of like, what about all those cool sourdoughs that we miss? What about that like Baltic rye that no one, like there's a whole world of stuff out there that, and so that's kind of one of the things that natural wine is about, is like really emphasizing that, with commercialization and with industrialization, with manipulation really is what they're talking about. And I think people don't quite understand the degree of manipulation that's going on in their, $12, even a nice $12 bottle of wine, which is kind of where I buy my wine. Like I don't spend $20 on a bottle of wine. I buy relatively cheap bottles of wine. And they color it, they put tannin powder in it, they, they're doing all kinds of weird, trickery with the acidity and the sugars, and basically what they're doing is they're making it's basically a way to take wine that would normally be unpalatable and unsellable and turn it into a mediocre wine. And that's so there's a lot of resistance to that. And I think that what we're trying to do is to understand what that philosophy means for mead making, because mead making on certain levels is inherently manipulative, right? You're picking your starting gravity. You can't really do that with grapes. That's the big thing that is people are mucking around with, is like the starting gravity of their grapes. So we have honey. We just add more honey if we want more, sugar in it. So that's already we're already a little bit weird, and we're adding fruits and herbs, and like that's sort of confusing for natural wine people if they're from the grape wine world. But I think underneath it, our basic philosophy is to express the honey and to express the fruit that comes with it. And by using wild yeast, and again, I should say by doing spontaneous fermentation, what you're saying is perhaps the yeast are different in the fall that come in with the honey than the ones in the spring. I mean, I think they would be, I can't talk to them, so I don't know, but, I like that. Also again, with what we're doing, it's like this idea that the mead needs to be consistent batch to batch is just this invention of people who used to be brewers and made beer. Beer is something that's always been made in factories. It's been made in factories since Egypt. Like nobody brewed beer at home until, the late 20th century. So this whole homebrew thing is just a modern invention. In beer, in the culture of beer, yes, if you're drinking Kolsch and Cologne, you want that beer to taste the same as it did 50 years ago. And it's going to be some old guy there. And if it doesn't taste like it did 50 years ago, he's going to yell at you and yell at everybody else. So yeah, the beer has to be consistent. In wine, in winemaking, in the wine culture, there's really very little interest in that. The whole point of wine is to express the differences of the years and to have vintages which have character. And that some years are different than other years, and that's okay. And not only that you're not making a sterile, dead product. Like beer is dead. It's sterile. Wine is alive. Natural wine is alive. It changes in the bottle and will change over time. And that's also considered an asset, not a flaw, right? So, yeah. Some of this stuff is that would normally be thought of as being a problem. I think it's really just a kind of perspective question. So we do vintages, we don't just sit there and knock out the same mead over and over again. It's what time of year is it? It's okay, so we're bottling the sour sparkling mead, which means now I make more of it, and it sits in the thing for a year or wherever it goes, and I bottle it next year. So, what we do is we make bigger and bigger batches each time, but we'll make them at the same time each year. So it'll be a little different, especially also with the herbs, until we have complete control over the supply chain, meaning we'd have to grow and dry the herbs that we want to use. It's hard to say, anyone who's worked with juniper or chamomile or any of the kind of commercial herbs that you can get, it depends when they picked them. It depends where they came from. I mean, there's just a lot of variability in the herbs. So every year we have to kind of adjust the recipe and sort of dial it in. And then also, we're also kind of adjusting our recipes periodically. The dandelion wine every year gets kind of more intense because that's just kind of where we're taking it to be more efficient about extracting the flowers, the flavor from the flowers and treating the flowers better. I'm not gonna just because I let some flowers thaw last year and then refreeze. I'm not going to do that again this year because I want it to taste bad like it did, or something, try to make it better every year,
Exactly.
So, yeah.
One thing I wanted to bring you back to, you mentioned that natural yeasts aren't so much of a problem because temperature control is so important. What I through apathy had a couple of meads last year with a pair that I was making that I just let go and never actually pitched the yeast on them. One was in a fridge at cold temperature, and one was in my basement at a reasonable temperature. And one ended up coming out like kerosene, and the other one had a thick mat of stuff
Mold
on the top that actually tasted pretty good, but not like there was much alcohol in there.
Yeah. Well, so you put what was it? It was pear juice and honey.
Yeah.
Well, and where was it? Pear juice or pears that you smashed up? Like, what were you starting with?
It was juiced pears, skin and all.
Did you taste that one?
Oh, that's cool.
Oh my god.
No, different one, Vicky.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, okay, so so the one in the fridge. I mean, you can't make alcohol in the fridge. It's hard. It's really hard.
Sorry, my brew fridge. My brew fridge. It wasn't.
I see.
It was kept down around 12 degrees. Sorry.
Which is what in Fahrenheit? I'm a little bad with Celsius.
60
about
something, isn't it?
60 something.
Yeah.
60, yeah.
That's 60.
They've been teaching me Celsius.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'll tell you something that is important is with something like pear, is the pH and the acidity. Like, part of controlling the acidity is controlling the other microorganisms. So it's like, yes, I am using wild yeast, but I'm not doing it in an environment that isn't like, it's very hard to do it if the mead isn't, sometimes the honey is acidic enough, and sometimes it's not. It really depends on what you're using. So that could be an issue. And then also, it's a complex system, right?
Temperature clearly makes a difference, because the one in the basement smelled like kerosene and was disgusting.
Oh, yeah.
The one that was in the brew fridge was better, but didn't. And maybe it was just the yeast didn't take it very far, so I couldn't really taste the alcohol in it. What sort of temperature are you talking? How do you? No.
Well, yeah, it's hard to talk about things without the hydrometer reading. But basically, every different point in the pH and temperature, you're going to select for different organisms that thrive at those points, right? And some organisms are very selective. They only want to be at 75 degrees, and they don't like it at 65, and they'll die off at 80. So mostly what you wanted. Every now and then we had a problem, like the black currant. We do a wild fermentation. The black currant is tricky because it's acidic. It's so acidic. The black currants are just naturally very acidic. So it's a little bit of a hostile environment for the yeast. They can normally handle it, but look, we're talking, sometimes I have to wait 10 days, 14 days before you start to see the fermentation. And what's happening in those 14 days? You've got a big, giant vat of sugar water. Every organism on Earth wants to get in there and wreak havoc, right? And what your real issue is mold. You don't want mold on that thing. So,
okay.
And the thing about mold is, like, what kills the mold is really the CO2 coming out of the yeast. So that layer of CO2 that's bubbling up on that surface is moving the liquid around, right? So that mold doesn't get a chance to hold. And then also, like, mold, that most of those surface loving things, so they want oxygen, right? So, maybe I'm stirring it to make sure. I wouldn't try and do a spontaneous fermentation unless it was at least 65 degrees. Below 60, it's hard. You really kind of, at that point, you have to hope that there's enough of a population of yeast in there that, I just wouldn't do it. It's cold. It's too cold. Now, it's certainly fine to bring it down to 60 once you get going, but like that initial period, you just start favoring other organisms. So you don't want to do that. And then, at a certain point, once you have some fermentation going, the issue is going to be like, well, can it finish out the sugar? And, at that point, you might want to use nutrients or not, if you feel like that's important. And also, you might want to stir it if you've got, like we do surly aging. So that means that for some of the meads, we're purposefully leaving them on the lees. But lees will compact and produce bad flavors, so you want to kick them up. And that's another way to like feed the yeast, because there's stuff in there they'll eat. And then also, the question of like, a lot of the herbs we use are actually designed to be antibacterial, right? So when we put juniper, like when people are putting bog myrtle, or they're putting rosemary, or they're putting juniper into their meads, they're not always doing it for the flavor. It's like they're like hops or antibacterials. So the use of herbs is another way to control the other organisms in the mead. And, that's just sort of trial and error. And, for me, like, whenever I do something, there's always like 2 or 3 little carboys scurried away somewhere where I did something different to see if it made a difference. What's surprising is that some of these old recipes, there's a lot of stuff in them that doesn't really taste like anything. We use like bay leaf, or but they'll like clear the wine, right? And that's because they've got these tannins that will bind to the proteins but not produce any bitterness, right? So they don't really taste like much, but they help the proteins drop out. So it's complicated. There's all kinds of things going on, but mostly what I would say is if you want to, this is like an hour in. I probably should have said this first thing. If you want to try making a wild mead, do it. Just do it. Just 2. Do one with a commercial yeast. Do one with a regular yeast. But doing a wild mead means that you have to be a little bit more attentive. So, you need to don't try and make a 16 or 20% alcohol. Shoot for something around 12%. That's where we are. And there's historical reasons for that, but that's a nice even range for something. It's a lot easier if you're just going to make a dry mead. We ferment out dry because we can't count on any particular, I guess you can have a sterile batch, introduce a very specific strain of yeast, and know that it's going to kick out at 10%, and you'll have a semi-sweet mead. But that's in a fantasy world where you have control over the environment. It just takes one other yeast in there to ruin that. So I can't live in that world. I'm too much of a mess. I barely can wash my hands, So I'm just assuming that everything is in there, and I have to assume that stuff is not sterile. And if you have a not sterile environment, your best thing that you can do is use the wine to preserve itself. So ferment out all the sugar, so you don't have anything for microorganisms to eat. Don't use a drop more nutrient than you need, because leaving most people don't understand what DAP is. It's fertilizer. It's literally the same stuff that you put on the ground. You're just putting fertilizer in there. So it's nitrogen. So if you put nitrogen and you sprinkle it on your kitchen counter and add a little water, when you come back, you'll have mold. Everything on earth wants that stuff. It wants to eat it. So you don't want that lying around in your wine unless it's getting eaten by your yeast and processed. So, very low nutrients. And then, and you compensate for that by having a longer fermentation time. So, if you want your mead to be done in 2 weeks and then filter it and then knock it out, and so you can just do that, you're going to have to put nutrients and all this crap in there. But if you're willing to take your time with it, you don't need a lot of nutrients. And then when you're done, you've got what was historically a stable wine, which is over 10%, no nutrients, no residual sugar. That will keep forever and age and be beautiful and wonderful, and you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't have to be sterile. Your bottling line doesn't have to be sterile. You don't have to sterilize. You don't have to filter all the yeast out. That thing will take care of itself. So that's kind of what we do.
Okay,
and we don't have to worry about it.
So I'm going to take you back a bit to the surly aging, because not one but 2 people on the chat have asked how long.
Should I be on a computer looking at some
yeah,
you'll just tell me if there's an interesting.
Yeah, I can send
if you want.
If you want, I can give you a link to the chat. Just have you friended? I friended you on Facebook. I don't know if you've accepted it yet.
Oh, Facebook will break my computer. It's from 2000.
Oh, okay. I can get you a link to the chat if you want. But we've got a live chat going on. People just throw questions at us. But they're asking how long do you surly age your meads?
That is
and
a good
not
question.
only that, how often do you stir up the yeast that you're mentioning You said you don't want to let it compact, so you said you keep it stirred up. How often do you tend to it during that period?
Yeah.
That is also a good question. I do not have a rigorous method right now. We're still like trying to dial it in. What I will say is that this is really not an issue for most home brewers or home winemakers because the issue about stirring it has to do with the lees compacting. And in a 6-gallon carboy, they're really just not under enough pressure, and it's not going to be in there long enough. It just took me a long time to figure this out, but I don't think it really matters in a 6-gallon carboy that much if you stir it up or not, because you can do it once or twice. But the main reason you're stirring it up is you're trying to prevent, like now in a barrel, or certainly in a large fermentation tank. And we do most of our winemaking in barrels, wood barrels. But in a large fermentation tank, you can imagine kind of pressure and the volume of leaves that are on the bottom of that thing. So you do that, and now you got some weird stuff happening, right? So again, this is about not controlling. Like it's like I'm more of a gardener than a baker or chemist, So like it's about controlling the environment. Like I don't need to pull up all the weeds, but like if I've got like a flood and it's pooling water in that area of the garden, I'm going to fix that because it's some weird thing. And that's like the leaves. Like it's fine unless you've got like 3 inches of it and you've got like 10,000 pounds of pressure on it. And then you've got a compact mass that doesn't have oxygen in it. It's anaerobic. Well, I guess the whole thing's anaerobic. But anyway, stuff starts to get weird in there. You have an environment that doesn't exist anywhere else in your winemaking, and you don't want that. So that's why people stir it up. And obviously if you really want the flavor, you're going to like do that. Here's the trouble. A lot of the commercial yeasts that people use, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think like the D47 or D17 or something like that. You can look it up. They have a reputation for being bitter. And you want to rack them off because those aren't good tasting. One of the problems with, you got this yeast that like ferments really fast, but the bad side is it tastes like crap. So you need it out of your wine as soon as possible. So you can figure that. What we've been doing recently is like, because we're really trying to get this, it was a little bit haphazard, like how often we'd rack or not. And, maybe we'd forget about one. And so this year we're actually doing trials on all the like the meads that we certainly age, so that we'll do like say we have 4 barrels, we'll keep one of them racked, and the second one we'll rack it off just like once or twice, and the third and the fourth one maybe we'll leave on the whole time so we can have real definitive study on the wild yeast. But the best way to tell is actually just to taste the yeast, and some of the yeast doesn't taste good, it tastes bad. Some of the yeast tastes like creamy, nice. So again, one of the things about champagne yeast is that it has a nice flavor. The yeast that they use for Chardonnays often have a nice flavor because they're the ones that are surly aged. And if you want a surly aged thing, I mean, it's subtle. I mean, you're basically adding like a kind of breadiness to it. You're adding a little bit of character that's a little bit of weight. So if you think about a Chardonnay, people talk about like a buttery Chardonnay. Like it's basically a bright, sort of boring white wine. But if you surly age it, right? I mean, I don't know. Like I'm not really a wine connoisseur, but it's it adds like some depth to it. Yeah, exactly. So it adds some depth to it if you want to like bring down the brightness, or to compensate maybe for some of the acidity. I guess you would do something like that. It just tends to make it taste a little bit like bread. I guess is the best way to say it. Now, I'm sure there's some like surly winemaker out there who's like also surly.
Surly winemaker.
Surly.
Yeah. Who's gonna be like?
There are probably lots
probably
of
not
surly
listening to
winemakers
this.
out there. There she is.
Yeah.
We were beginning to think AJ had died or something.
Yeah, but I think you just have to try it like anything. Like I would say one of the benefits of not being a commercial winemaker is you can experiment. Like I find like the most boring thing about homebrewers is that they feel like they have to like use recipes and then try and match something. Like no, the whole fun of being a home winemaker is that you can fail. You know what I mean? Like you're allowed to fail. and it's only through failure that you're going to learn anything. So like if you're not like doing things in such a way, now I don't mean failure by being lazy, like not writing down what you did, because that's inexcusable, or not taking readings, because what's the point of doing a test and being like, oh yeah, how much honey did I use? Like, no, you're not allowed to do that. But take notes and then do an experiment and leave one on the leaves and leave one off the leaves, and then you see for yourself. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because several of the training classes that I have taken for various things, I went through 2 different health coach programs. And one of the things that came out of both of those was to be willing to fail forward. And one of my favorite things that I used to, when I was teaching health coaches later on, one of the things I used to teach them was the adage that some reporter said to Thomas Edison, so you failed like 700 times to create a light bulb. And he said, no, I found 700 ways it didn't work. And so
right.
it's a mindset, it's a perspective, and being willing to say, well, alrighty then, we know that this and this and this don't happen together, so let's try this and this and this. It's experimentation. It's being willingness to play out there in that field. The downside, of course, being that sometimes you have to dump it down the sink, and honey's not cheap. But
Well, I would say before you dump it down the sink, put it back in the basement, forget about it. It might be good in 5 years. Like
I had one that did that. My first mead was like that.
Yeah.
It was horrible for 4 years, and then it was amazing, and then it was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my teachable moments is going on 10 years in the carboy.
Yeah, sure. Why
I'm
not?
still waiting.
It's just space.
Yeah.
It's just space. I mean, I've got stuff in the back of the winery, like, I don't even know what it is anymore. And I've been, like, lugging that thing around for, like, 6 years. It's got a big question mark.
Occasionally you have to go taste it and go, what was this again? I don't remember. One of the things that popped up for me when you were talking about this, I know you manage your temperature, if not control it completely, but do you have like a temperature range you try to stay within with your meads when you're fermenting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's an ideal world, and then there's the AC.
Then there's where you end up.
That.
Yeah, because it's 100 degrees in upstate New York that day. Yeah, I know. But
well, okay. So here's the thing. There's things start to change when the containers that you're fermenting in get bigger.
Yeah.
Because there's a ratio of the surface area of the container to the volume of it, right? So on a carboy, if you've got 6 gallons, that thing's not going to overheat on its own because it's got so much surface area relative to the volume of the wine. But if you start making 1,000 liters or 10,000 liters, now you've got very little surface area and a huge amount of volume. And then things start to get really tricky because the wine can't cool itself, and it will actually get into a runaway. Now, again, because we're using wild yeast, the yeasts are a little bit, they're not these thoroughbreds. They don't work that fast. They don't produce a lot of heat. We can get by with not having a cooling system. But you get a commercial yeast in there, and let's say it's like 70 degrees, and you put a commercial yeast in there, you're going to come in the morning, and it's going to be at 90 degrees. Like the yeast will heat the container up. And they will produce their own heat, and then it becomes and that will make them move faster because the yeasts are temperature dependent, so they just ferment faster when they're hotter, so which will produce more heat, right? So you can get this runaway effect, especially in the early stages of fermentation. So it's very important to control the temperature of the fermentation in the early stages because most of the flavor is produced then actually is in the first few days. So in an ideal world, I'd almost always ferment cooler than I can. Like if those yeasts will work at 60 degrees, I'll do them at 60. If they can work at 50 degrees, then I do them at 50.
Okay.
There's a point where they get stressed out by really low temperatures, and there's a point where they'll give up and they can't handle the high alcohol levels. But like in general, you want to do them cooler rather than hotter. That being said, for wild yeast, I haven't experienced the kind of problems that you get with some of the commercial yeasts at high temperatures. So most yeast, like if it's 80, 75, 80, they're going to start tasting bitter. There's going to be consequences for sure of a high temperature. You'll be done faster, but it's going to taste I guess the way to talk about it is like it'll taste hot. It'll taste like young alcohol. Like all those flavors you'll have that will be worse. So and also, I mean, you got to think about the chemistry too, right? So the yeast don't just produce alcohol; they produce 100 billion esters and all these other like chemicals. And you want to hold on to them, because that's the smell. It's like all the stuff you smell is stuff coming out of the liquid into the air on its own at room temperature. That's what smelling is, right? Those are volatile chemicals. So if you heat your mead up to 85 degrees and it's boiling over from fermentation, all that stuff's going out the tube. You're blowing off all the flavors. So
it makes your house smell great, but there's not much left in your mead.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly. The more you smell the mead, the less you're going to have to smell it later. It's like, it's like the rule about cooking garlic. You don't want to smell it in the pan because that means you don't get to taste it. You don't want to blow off that stuff. So especially in the beginning, I would say as long as you can count on it fermenting, and again, if you're using a commercial yeast, there's usually guidelines for the temperature range.
Yeah.
We have one of the fermentation locations is upstate, the original location. It's in the basement. We have no temperature control there whatsoever. So, I mean, I can heat it up a little bit in the winter, but not enough for something to ferment. And sometimes in there, we've used a commercial yeast. There's there's like a RHST or something. I forget what it's called, but it's like a white wine yeast that's designed for it can ferment at 45 degrees, which is insane. And we've had to do that in the past. But yeah, most things, yeast would love it to be 75 degrees. And I feel like your dog would like to run around without a leash too. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's actually a lot of experimentation going on now, both professionally and at home with higher temperatures. In fact, Carvin Wilson. Carvin and Robin went to wine country in California, and they were and being Carvin, he's talking to the actual winemakers instead of just tasting like a normal person, So Carvin's back there in the back with the winemaker quizzing the guy, and he found out that a lot of because they're making 50,000 gallons of wine all at once, that they're experimenting with going as high as 80, 85 degrees, 90 degrees. And, and everybody's going, ooh, oh my God, and yet they're coming up with wines that are amazing. So,
it's possible. Everything's possible. I'm very suspicious though. And I'll tell you why, because it's every single aspect of winemaking is there's a pressure to do it faster.
Yes, there
every
is.
Single part of it, from the fermentation to the bottle aging and most of the stuff you buy out there at the homebrew store and they're offshoots which are of chemistry that's available commercially for the commercial wine world. And in the commercial wine world, the pressure to make your wine sellable faster. I mean, I have a business.
Flipping your mead, you got to keep this
palpable.
process going. Yeah, and that's true for a lot of the mead world too. Is especially when you're starting, you have to get your rhythm going, and you have to get enough stuff on the shelves to keep the money coming in so that you can make more mead. And that was one of the things that I was curious about with yours, because you're doing something that you're okay with a longer ferment, which. I'm going to come back around to it as how long is the ferment, and and then you're aging.
What
for
is fermentation?
Year. Well, exactly, yeah.
Yep.
So you're working with a lot of wild yeast, sometimes commercial yeast, but a lot of wild yeast. So you have to look at that. You're actually dealing with some variabilities that people who are working with commercial yeast don't necessarily have to deal with as much. So I'm curious about that, because from a business model standpoint, you got to keep stuff not on the shelves per se, but supplied to your client base. However you do that,
I do. I mean, but also sometimes we run out.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of meaderies do that. And
then next time they buy more, so they have it.
Give me a case this time, dude, because I don't want to run out. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the that's the deal when you're dealing with limited edition stuff. It's runs out. I mean, there's a cash flow problem always, because it's I want to make the next mead, and we need money, and a lot of that comes from selling it to restaurants and stuff. But We built our business around having a successful like front of house operation. So we have a bar. The bar is dry, like has a much faster cash turnaround than the wholesale business, and allows us to grow the wholesale business sort of organically. Also, most of these things about, it's like, okay, so it's like you put $10,000 of ingredients, and a year later that turns into $50,000 worth of wine or something like that. I'm just making those numbers up. I don't actually know off the top of my head what that is, but hopefully. And so what a bank would say is like, well, then why don't you do that 4 times and have $200,000 at the end? And the only reason you can't is either you don't have enough space or you don't have enough capital to do it.
Right.
But I think, if your model is a brewery, which unfortunately most of the commercial meaderies are, and not a winery, then yes, of course, breweries knock shit out in 2 weeks, and they make more if they want. If people are like, I love that beer, they go make more of it. It's just not how wineries work. Wineries are seasonal operations. They typically make not these like weird California commercial ones, which are like making the Carlo Rossi and stuff, which are not not on the table for me in this conversation.
Budweiser
but
wines, yeah.
Well, or and actually there was a guy at the Mead Festival who he had visited one. It was just describing it. It's insane. But they're making wine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year round. I don't know what they're doing with the grapes. They're probably making grape concentrate, just preserve it over time. Who knows? But if you look at, in my opinion, the mead world right now looks a lot like, the California grape wine world of the 60s and 70s, which is like everybody assumed it was kind of garbage. It was sweet or too strong and cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what most people think of mead. And we spend a lot of time having to educate our customers, like, no, actually it can be high quality and it can be dry and it can be aged and things like that.
I've had that conversation with countless reporters. Yeah, I totally hear you.
Yeah.
They're like, is it all sweet? And it's like, no.
No. Right, but that's literally what they would.
Is all wine sweet? No.
Yeah, but it's not the honey. It's the way. It's like if you make really fast, cheap mead, it's like that's what they're going to taste. So in California, that's the kind of wine that was being made. And then within that, there was a few small producers that were doing really high quality grapes, slower fermentation, aging for a few years, doing like European style wine, and now increasingly natural wine. And that's become, the Sonoma Valley of California. And what we understand is that California wine can be some of the best wine in the world. That took 2 decades. And they had to spend a lot of the time making great wine and then fighting the stereotype that California wine is cheap and it's bad and it's sweet and it's too strong. So like for me, I kind of am hoping to like wake up some of the mead world to be like, no, like your model should not be Carlo Rossi. Your model should be these small like Sonoma wine businesses because they're still around, right? And they do well. They're not huge multi-billion-dollar businesses, but they're really respected. They have great business. Mm-hmm. They do something they really respect, and their sense of scale and speed is just different than a brewery, which is like constantly like doing distribution and constantly like, they build up their reputation, they build up their client base. A lot of them do almost entirely direct sales. I mean, it's kind of fascinating actually, like those wineries. And especially, nowadays, I mean, with the alc pop market growing, and Coca-Cola releasing, Coca-Cola is going to release like alcoholic soda soon.
Yeah,
and
I heard about that.
If you're like a $1 million a year revenue meadery in some secondary city, and you're trying to compete with Coca-Cola with like something that basically is made exactly the same way with like citric acid added and carbonation, and it's 6%. And the only difference is that they use white sugar and you use honey, and yours is going to be more expensive because honey is like 1 billion times cheaper. I mean, more expensive than sugar. then you're going to lose that fight. You know, if you're trying to appeal to a mass market and you're trying to like go up against Coca-Cola, then you're going to lose. So I think that as an industry, we have a much better future if people focus on things that can't be reproduced by Coca-Cola, you know, which is, again, like regionality, you know, artisanally made, something specific to like your vision of that time and place. Like, you know, those are the things that has made wine interesting over all the years, because there's so much diversity in it, in that world. So, you know, that's kind of where I feel like we should be heading, you know, both as homebrewers and as commercial people.
Well, I think a lot of, I mean, you were saying earlier that we tend to kind of lean towards the brewer model of the, you know, bring in a mead, flip it quick, and then reproduce that. And you're right, you know, because from a certain, you know, from a profit perspective, there's a lot of solidity and potentiality there. But it's also a customer model that they choose to adhere to. But I'm also seeing more and more meaderies that are breaking out into the more artisanal outlook of things. And they're okay with being small and kind of exclusive.
That's cool. So what are some of the other ones that you feel like maybe I should check out?
Eric Newquist, who's, if I remember correctly, in Washington. He goes out and gathers his own herbs to, you know, he does his own foraging to add all sorts of interesting stuff to his meads. So there's a lot of that going on. Cool. Yeah, Sap House is doing some really fascinating stuff with herbal concoction type meads that are not.
Sure. They're up in Vermont, right?
Yeah, they're in not New Hampshire. They're in Maine.
New Hampshire.
They're in Maine. Yeah.
Yeah, they do a really nice cider. I met those guys. They're weirder than me.
Well, they're as weird as you are, Rafe, definitely. But
yeah.
You know, I mean, that's
have you met them?
Oh God, yeah, I know.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I've been to the place. It's a cute little place. They're actually getting a bigger building now, and the town they're in is this teeny little bitty town that if you blink you'll miss it. It's awesome. It's gorgeous, stunning. I mean, I'd live there in a minute. You know, if it weren't so bloody cold in the wintertime, I'd already be there. But you know, I mean, Maine is gorgeous anyway. But they're just in this beautiful community, like in the backwoods. It took me like 2 hours of driving through the woods to get to their place. It was awesome.
Wow.
And, yeah, I mean, my kind of place.
You've been. I can't believe you've been there. That's like. Oh, did you drive around?
Oh yeah. Last year I spent 2 years
cool.
traveling America and visited 42 meaderies in 2 months. It was really cool.
I missed you.
Yeah, well, I didn't make it to New York. Wow. When I came up in March was the first time I've been to New York in a couple of years, but I'm going to be coming back next year for the Ferm Fest. So when I do, I'm going to be touring New York.
You missed me too, because I was up in March, and for some reason you weren't at the meadery that day.
Yeah.
Because we went upstate on a tour, and and I wasn't able to drop in. I can't remember why.
Well, you know, we're going to have a New York Mead Festival on August 5th. Although I have to go on Facebook apparently to organize it. So
you do. I know. Sorry, Ray, if you're just going to get Bobby to do it. He's on Facebook all the time.
No, it is Bob. Bobby's like been really key in putting it together. So
Bobby's amazing.
I have to send an email out to everybody. I mean, there's about like a half dozen of us who are commercial meaderies in the area. So I think we're going to try and get together and just have like a little like festival for a day, and people. I don't know. We have to figure out what it is. I think what I'd like to do is have it be kind of an educational thing where people can bring mead and ask questions and like have some professionals around, and then also do tastings. But maybe you can come up to that.
Unfortunately, 6 days after that, I leave for Australia for 2 weeks. So traveling a week before I leave for Australia is probably not going to do it. Hamish would have a cow if I screwed that up. But since we've been planning for months now.
Not as much as your husband. But.
Yeah, 90,000 points down the tubes. But yeah, no, I would love to come up for it, but I can't this year. But we could certainly spread the word. Not a problem there. I'll be happy to blast it all over my social media.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. And
so just bringing you back to the herbs that you use. A lot of those herbs that you mentioned have a very old English medicinal sound to them.
Oh yeah, like yarrow.
And I know that if you if you look up the old books, you can find that, this is used as a digestive, this is used to thin your blood for whatever reason, all that sort of stuff. Do you market your meads as having these old world herbs that are known to have these properties, or are you not allowed to do that?
It's complicated. I mean, you're not allowed to make health claims on the labels or in general, really. They're very uptight about it, the TTB. Yeah. So, but that being said, I think people who care about that stuff, they'll recognize the herbs. It's interesting. I think, for example, the dandelion wine has a lot of dandelion in it, and dandelion definitely has certain really interesting health benefits and things like that. We forage it and put it in a bottle and preserve it, and there's no other way to really preserve dandelions because drying them doesn't really work. And actually the flower heads are really much more potent than the roots are in terms of this their chemistry and stuff, I think. So traditionally that was a medicine. It wasn't like a medicine or with medicinal qualities. That dandelion wine was a medicine. Like a tonic. It's like a medicine you take every day. Juniper, elderberry, those things, they have really long histories. So do hops, right? Hops is primarily like a soporific and antibiotic, and like
I make a sleepy time. I make a sleepy time tea that's hops and chamomile and passion flower, and several different things. And I used to give it to my mother for sleep. It got her off of sleep meds. It'd be fun to make a mead that would do that.
And you certainly could. I mean, there's
you could.
There's a lot. You got to be careful with the soporifics because there's all kinds of there's pretty strong stuff out there. Also, we're sort of limited to what we can do commercially for interstate trade. It has to be on the generally recognized as safe list, which is not that long. And I was going to say about the hops, especially for the homebrewers out there. If you had trouble sleeping, I discovered this in Russia. I was at this really tiny village. There were like 200 people. They were growing hops there. And I was like, what? And I was looking around the house. It was like one of these places, the house was like a room, So they didn't really have a lot of stuff. And they didn't really have any brewing equipment or any evidence of that. And I finally found out why they were growing the hops. And they would dry the hops and then put them in a pillow and then sleep on them.
Oh, yeah. Hot pillows are big with herbalists.
Yeah, they're really effective for helping you go to sleep.
Yeah, they are.
And
you get a hot lavender pillow, and dude, you're gonna sleep like a baby.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so but also it's like trying to think we have a roof deck now. We're growing a garden in, and it's like we're doing a lot of trials for different herbs. For example, we use lavender in an herb as one of the herbs, but which lavender? There's dozens of lavenders out there that we could be using. And so we're going to grow them all out so that I actually have something that I can play with and test. Calendula, scented geraniums are really interesting. There's a whole world of Chinese herbs that are really exciting and have been used in China with wine, primarily medicinally. So we're investigating all that stuff. But yeah, we can't really make any health claims, sadly. But you can Google it.
Yeah, we have a loophole here, I believe. We have a loophole here, really? I believe, where you can say, this was traditionally used for we make no claim.
Well, you can say that on a vitamin or herbal supplement or something here in the States, but you can't put it on alcohol. They're like, you can't kind of talk your way out of it for that wine. It's, a lot of weird things happened after prohibition in terms of the regulation of alcohol that just don't really make any sense, and that's one of them. We don't want to confuse people that they think it's medicine, and that's because actually a lot of the wineries that survived through prohibition, they survived as the oldest winery in LA, for example, which is one of the oldest wineries in the country. It's in the city, and it survived through the 20s as making some kind of they basically sold it as medicine,
tonics or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And then they were allowed to continue to produce alcohol. So it had something to do with that.
Yeah, a lot of our
And
goofy
yeah,
laws are left over from prohibition, which is really sad
Ours too.
because yeah, there's so many things. I've been studying herbs for, I mean, I'm not learned in a traditional sense, but just reading a lot of books and stuff. And it's
Sure.
amazing some of the stuff that you can do. I've been making herbs and salves and things like that for, well, since my daughter was a baby. I used to make things for her when she had muscle pains and and I'd give her teas for when she had a tummy ache and stuff like that. So I
Right.
find it fascinating. That was one of the things that attracted me to what you were doing, even though I wasn't sure I would necessarily like the combinations you were doing. I loved the idea of it, and then ended up finding out I did like it, which was really cool. Just goes to show you preconceived notions don't necessarily mean crap. But
yeah, true.
I mean, I love the combinations, and I thought, wow, those are great combinations, but what will they taste like? So I think it's really neat that
Right.
you're not afraid to play with that and see what happens,
Well, also, look, like it's not like I'm gonna like make, even like 50 gallons of something without extensively trialing it
Oh, yeah,
beforehand.
yeah.
So, I'll do like, properly. It takes years to develop a new mead. Like I want to use, for example, I'm going to start playing around with like Schizandra berries or something. So Schizandra berries is like the 7 flavor berries, the Chinese fruit. It's like a little kind of cranberry sized thing. And it's really interesting. It has like literally all the flavors. It has salty. It's like salty and it's sweet and it's sour and it's also tannic and it smells really good. Like it's really crazy. So it's like, all right, well, what are you
Wow.
going to do with this thing? It's like, well, I mean, I think one thing that people who, study herbs learn pretty quickly, but a lot of people don't know is that all the chemicals that are in an herb, like they don't necessarily come out they're not solvent in necessarily. Like, for example, mints are water soluble.
Mm-hmm.
Like the oils of the mint that come off in the water. So you can just put them in water, but lots of plants, they actually require alcohol to extract.
Mm-hmm.
And some will require heat, and some will require, so
Well, like hops
juniper,
requiring heat to break down the resins.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Juniper's like that. Juniper with a cold infusion is very different than one in a hot infusion. So, you have to kind of get your head around all those aspects right away. And then you can be like, well, what's the dosage? And am I going to add at the beginning or at the end? There's a lot of things. You can't just throw them in there. So we do that in like small batches. And then also like, how do they age? All that stuff. So there's a lot of parts to it.
Yeah, there really is. This is, I mean, it seems to me like this kind of thing is the stuff of multiple episodes for one. We're coming up on our 2 hours, but I see a lot of fascinating sidebars that we could take with this. And it seems to me, and I've got to check with Bobby, he had a lady who is doing a lot of the same kind of things, but from a different direction. So I was thinking, one of the things I was thinking is getting the two of you on. And
that'd be cool.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Well,
so having that kind of conversation to kind of further explore.
What's a different direction? Like all artificial chemicals?
No. I mean, just exploring the further delving into the possibilities of mead and looking at different directions and what can you do with herbs and what can you do with spices and and what are some of the things that people aren't really thinking about but that are possible. I'm forever telling reporters, they're like, well, what's mead like? And I'll go, well, the thing is it can be anything. We're the Wild West of beverages. We can literally do anything we want, within the rules that are constricted upon us by the TTB. But I mean, the as long as it's GRAS, we can work with anything, make any kind of combination, and with any intensity, and it's just amazing the possibilities. Things that don't turn up in any other beverage, you can do in mead.
Mm-hmm. Well, unless you're just making flavored seltzer, right? Again, so for me, I think one of the important sort of things is that, and again, one of the reasons why I'm interested in using local stuff and trying to be more natural and learning to do that is because I think constraints actually really help make a good product. And that choosing with something like mead, because it's such an open category, the most interesting thing a mead maker does is choose their constraints, right? Like, what are the terms under which you're working? Like, if the terms under which you are working is simply to make a base mead and then to flavor it with anything from under the sun to make a zillion meads, like, it's hard to say that your brand is about anything in a way. You know what I mean? Like if you think of a wine that you like or a rum you like, it's like at a certain point they made a decision to make things a certain way for a certain reason, and that defined how they worked. And I think the challenge with mead is to do something similar, is to like figure out what your philosophy is and make things under those constraints. So, you know, that's so for us, I think one of the things that like becomes really important is to think through like flavors and like, I don't like to flavor anything. I never like to think about something as being flavored. And I think once you get past that, because like if you're making grape wine, right? Nobody makes a grape wine. No one makes a Chardonnay that tastes like Chardonnay grapes, like picked out of a field. You know what I mean? The whole point of winemaking is to transform something from A to B, and that the B thing is something magical and special that you could never have without the transformation. So like for me, like making a peanut butter and jelly mead is insane. Like if you want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, go have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like it's there's no transfer. Like, and the idea that mead would be considered better if it allowed you to taste peanut butter and jelly. If like you drink that and you're like, wow, it really tastes like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like for me, that's a failure, not a success. So I think as mead makers sort of like get past this idea of flavoring their meads and starting to think about like using the ingredients to transform something together, like I think that's when the meads are going to really take off as being something really excellent. You know, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, no, I like that. I love the viewpoint. I think that's really fascinating because you're an artist, you know, and all mead makers, they're artists, so they can create based on what their creativity allows them to do, and I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, I think so. I mean, also like I really have a lot of respect for like, you know, like winemakers, you know, because they have their grapes from that year and they're going to make the best wine they can with it. And so like I'd love to see some meaderies out there like who just make like 3 awesome mead. Like I can't do it. I'm not too like crazy. I have to like I have a hard time just making
Aren't we all?
Like but you know, we do like, you know, 10. And at least I'm trying to like I'm not going to make any new ones until we get these 10 right. You know what I mean? Till like we really have them nailed. But I'm already like, you know, but I can make something just for the keg line, you know?
That's an easy
totally
way to
hear you
go,
on that.
Like just this one seasonal that we only do in the spring.
Like Like I want to do, like we're going to do some cherry bark and birch bark meads for the draft line. And then also we have we still do our CSA, right? So we have this membership program. And so now I'm like, well, you know, we really have to give them something special that the other people, you know, because they're sort of in a subscription, right? So they should get something you can't just buy on the shelf. So now I'm like, all right, well, now I can like kind of open up my R&D program again. So if we make a birch mead or we made a spruce tip mead last season, and they got it, and which is really exciting. Yeah. So that was really fun. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been super, super fun. Do you think people are going to listen through this whole thing? It's really long.
God, no, they have
absolutely.
Been. We've got a whole bunch of people that are still talking about it, and then it goes to the recording and say probably we get like there's a core bunch that listen live, and then there's the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that download it and listen to it on their drive time.
Oh, cool.
While they're working around the house or whatever.
I would say that if people want to stay up to date with us, like the main things that I do are Instagram at Enlightenment Wines. That's like kind of, you can check in. And then we send out, the other thing is we do like a newsletter like once a month or something. And we'll be like, here's the fun stuff happening in our tasting room, and here's the new bottle that's coming out. And that's the best way to get stuff, because part of the deal with having a limited edition run is like when it comes out, the bottles are like $25. But then when we run out, we sort of have this problem where it's like, if we sell it at the bar, you know, we'll get 5 glasses out of it. It's kind of a $60 bottle. So what happens is then everything gets really expensive when we run out. So because we need to save the bottles to serve them at the bar, because we get more money for them, basically. Mm-hmm. So what we try and do is, people on our mailing list, we warn them when we're running out of stuff, so that they have a chance to buy it before the price jump happens, and they also get the chance to, like, you know, join the CSA or whatever whenever we're doing like limited edition stuff. So yeah, join the mailing list. The best way to join the mailing list is just to email us, just at contact@enlightenmentwines.com.
Okay.
And there's an S
We'll
on
have that
wine.
in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Contact at Enlightenment Wines. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and then I'll just add you to the mailing list. I think we have a sign-up form, but I don't know if it works on the mobile site. I don't know. We're like about to have a new website, so the old website's kind of like don't
good,
look at
because
it
I was looking at your website and kind of going, oh, dude, no, seriously, you need to work on this.
Yeah, no, it was sort of a placeholder when we opened, and then it just was like one of those things that was like,
just never got around to it.
I don't know.
One of those jury rigs that becomes permanent.
It's okay. It's just kind of like a kind of deferral of, like, you know, trying to just be like, we're not trying to blast you with like some commercial all the time. You know, just like, here's all the stuff. If you want it, it's here.
Yeah.
You know, there's actually a lot of information on that website, but it's just not like a big, shiny, glossy ad for Enlightenment Wines. But, you know, has a link to our web store and stuff, and has a really nice FAQ and links to Facebook and stuff. So anyway, cool.
That works. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming online. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I reserve the right to drag you back in.
Please. Yeah. You should. Yeah. I'm excited. I can be that guy you call ask a question.
No, I mean, this has been really fascinating and very info dense, which is the kind of thing our listeners love. I mean, they're mead lovers, you know, so finding out more about better ways to make mead, find mead, get mead, whatever, is... If I can turn them on to natural wine, too. I mean, I would say I never really drank wine because I was very intimidated by it. And now what I've learned is actually, if you can find a natural wine, they tend to it doesn't matter what the grape is. Like, it's already going to be like a really much more tasty experience. But that article was really good. A friend of mine just gave it to me recently, and I'm like, okay, that's the one. That's like, here's the story. This is what people are doing. And then think about, like, well, what does that mean for mead? Like, mead's, you know, it's basically wine. You just make it like wine. So it's got a lot of the same issues. Oh, a couple of our listeners are asking, are you on Vino Shipper?
Yep, definitely.
Okay.
And if you go to our website, the web store is Vino Shipper. So
okay,
either way.
There you go. Enlightenmentwines.com, guys. So go check them out. I've tasted them, and I can tell you that they're good meads. So go check them out. But also, be prepared for unique, because they are not the same old. They are their own thing.
Yeah. Especially the stuff we have on Vino. I mean, everything's sold out except for the newest stuff. Okay. But in about a month, we're going to have a bunch of things out there. But
cool.
Yeah, if I was ordering, like, I'm kind of a cheapskate. So what I would say is there's 2 bottles on there that are $25. They're both really good. The $60 bottles, they're just $60 because we ran out of them. If you just wait, eventually they'll come back on. If you wait, they'll come back on at 25. You know,
there you go.
So, but you know, they're aged. So
yeah. Well, and you know, people are willing to pay for good meads that are well put together. You know, I mean, it's all about what you like and what you want.
The sparkling meads. Yeah, the sparkling meads are amazing. I would say they're definitely worth every penny. But yeah, I would say honestly, if you're thinking about buying stuff, you sign on the mailing list, and then I'll tell you when it comes out and how to. The dandelion wine and the Floralia and the sparkling mead, they're all going to come out in July. So that's going to be our summer line.
Cool.
Yeah, and they're going to be really good. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, anyway, thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Got Mead, for being a thing that is real in the world and good stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Rafe. I love having, people looking at things differently, and that you do, and that's good. We need that.
Cool. One day I'll have enough natural mead makers and we can have a basketball team and we can play that
Actually,
commercial
I
mead
think
maker.
you may already have a basketball team, so I don't think that'll be a problem. Actually,
Okay.
I may have you come on and teach a class on a private got mead thing for for people who want to come on and learn more. So we'll talk about that later offline.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah. So thank you so
Anytime.
much for being willing to come on the show, man.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks
for coming,
everybody. Okay. And
Take
come
care.
to New York, visit sometime.
Oh, yeah, I'll be back up there. No worries about that. It's just a question. It'd probably be next spring when the next Ferm Fest happens.
Okay. Well, I'll see you then.
Yep, I'll look forward to it.
Okay. All right. Bye.
All right, bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Ray. That was cool.
Definitely.
Oh my God, yeah. I think we just started to scratch the surface of natural mead and wild fermentations and the kinds of things that you can do, and I think we might want to do some more stuff with that to
Yeah, we got to get him back.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so. And I think what we need to do is maybe get him and another person who is in it, and just kind of delve further into this from a more how you make it standpoint. We learned a lot about what he's doing, but I think just kind of delving more into that approach and that outlook would be a really fun exploration.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, guys. So upcoming, we've got June 16th. Groenfell Meadery is having an Asian influence, a traditional Renaissance feast, and all these links are on
cool.
Yeah, I know, right? I wish I could go. And all these are linked on the show page, so you can go straight to where you can either sign up, get tickets, or find out where it is. June 18th, Superstition Meadery is having a Superstition Mead versus Bottle Logic pairing. It's a McKellar event at the McKellar Bar, NTDA. I'm not sure what that means. Go look at the link. It'll tell you all the details. June 24th, Rabbit's Foot Meadery, guided mead and cheese pairing. And then August 4th and 5th, and we're going to keep doing this until it happens, the Bee Nectar Palooza, an international beer, cider, and mead festival. So definitely some cool stuff coming up. And next week, we actually have Fred Minnick, who's the author of Mead, The Libations, Legends, and Lore of History's Oldest Drink. It's a book that just released on Amazon. You should go check it out and get a copy. Fred is author of a number of books on whiskey, bourbon, and rum and other alcoholic beverages, and is big on the cocktail circuit. In fact, I'm going to be speaking on a panel with him in July in New Orleans at Tales of the Cocktail, one of the largest cocktail conventions. Yeah, it was really cool. He's like, "You want to come speak on a panel about mead?" And I'm going, "It's in New Orleans? Yeah, sure, okay." So, of course, New Orleans in July isn't exactly the first place you want to be, but from a heat perspective. But still, it's really cool what they're doing there. And Fred's going to come on and talk about his journey into mead, because he's actually kind of new to mead. And, his perspective on what he learned. He came and he spoke at the MeadCon in Colorado in March, so he was on the speaker list as well. But good guy, interesting stuff, and he's really got an interesting perspective on mead. I think you guys will like what he has to say. So, and then after that, we got 2 weeks off because Vicky's going home to visit the Rents. We're going to go to the lake and hang out and try to do nothing at all for 2 weeks. So
Scheduling in some nothing is a really good idea.
scheduling
Everyone
in some
should
nothing.
do that now and
Yeah,
then.
there will be some things going on because I do have stuff I've got to get done, but I'm going to do as little something as I can get away with.
Yep,
So,
as much nothing as you can.
as much nothing as I can. Yeah, I need some nothing time. So anyway, tune in next week, guys, for our last one before we take a little break, and then we'll be back after that for a few more weeks. And I may even get to broadcast live from the Tales of the Cocktail. I have no idea yet if that'll work out because I've never been to this thing. So
Cool.
should be interesting. But that's all I got. You guys got anything that you want to put out there? Other than
Not
in
right
August,
now.
August 13th to the 28th, I'll be in Australia for any of our Australian listeners. hanging with Hamish, and we're going to be wandering between Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide over 2 weeks.
That's right.
Yeah,
Fun,
that's gonna be
fun.
so much fun. I'm so excited.
Perhaps even doing a show.
Yeah, I know. I
Australia.
planned on bringing all the equipment. I'm bringing the equipment to do a show from the pad.
Woohoo.
So we'll see if we can work it out. But yeah, I'd love to do a Got Mead live from Australia. That would be really cool.
Totally.
Yeah, I'd be so excited about that. I can't even tell you. So yeah, we're gonna try to arrange it, and we'll see if we can work it out. If we, we do it from the meetup in Melbourne. That's what I'm figuring, because there'll be Wi-Fi there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need a phone signal or Wi-Fi or something for this to work.
Well, I normally run off phone signal, so it works.
All right, cool.
Cool.
All right. So, all right then, guys. We will see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel on Got Me Live with Fred Minnick next time. So have a good one.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Night, everybody.
All right, night.